All right. It is now time to start talking, according to our mixer. Hello, everybody. This is Tom Linsky. We have Matthew DeWinkler here and Kyle Hudak with us.
No, you don't. Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, you do. Okay. Yeah, Kyle's here, actually.
Kyle is here. He's here this time.
I am here.
Yes.
Yeah, he's not asleep.
It's happening. It's actually happening. All right. So, anyway, Titanic is an amazing subject. It is always in the news. You know, if something new happens with
It's never going to go away.
It never goes away. It just never goes away. No matter how hard we try, we just can't get rid of this ship. And, you know, when we put out our real-time sinking video all over the news, it was on NPR, BBC, ABC, NBC, CNN interviewed me. You know, there was a lot of stuff going on. Millions of hits. And the world just seemed to go crazy. It was really fun for us. When we were doing our fundraiser, Whoopi Goldberg talked about us.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I had forgotten about that. Thank you for bringing it back up.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We can learn from that experience.
We can.
And then, now, as many of you are aware, Titanic has been in the news recently once again, this time not by our doing, this time by a journalist in Britain who believes that Titanic sank because of a fire. I'm pretty sure we had this one figured out already, guys. Pretty sure it was ice. Anyway, there's a documentary that came out. I forget the network. I think it was Channel 4 over in Britain, which I think means BBC 4. And, yeah, I mean, how many of you people listening have seen it? I know there's a lot of comments going on right now in the comment stream. Have you guys actually seen this documentary? It's on YouTube as well. It aired here in America. There's plenty of ways to see it.
There's going to be another special. It's going to be on a different channel in America, like next week or this week too, I believe.
I don't know. I
thought it was going to be on like the Smithsonian channel or something. I think we should have looked that up first.
Anyway, for everyone here who is saying that they have seen it, I am sorry for you. For everyone out there who is saying that they have not seen it, keep it that way.
Spoilers.
Yes, spoiler alert, it's not good. Now, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be so critical. I don't mean to be bashing it so much. I don't mean to be so insulting towards it. But there are many reasons why I strongly disliked it. Now, this whole podcast is not going to just be opinion. This is not going to be me simply saying, I didn't like it, so you shouldn't either. We have notes. We've all watched it. We've all sat down. We've had to pause it many times, go off, take a break, take a long walk, whatever we got to do. And then we come back and we continue it for another few minutes. And we had to keep doing it. So we eventually got through it so that you don't have to. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to go through these notes. We're going to bring up a lot of the claims that they claim in the documentary. We're going to go through them. We're going to rip them apart with fact. And then we're going to actually make a counterclaim. Now, it's not our own counterclaim. It is one of our historians' claims. But he could not
be... yes.
Yeah. He could not be here with us today. So we'll be making it for him. All right. Anyway, my biggest complaint with this documentary is it was 100% sensationalizing. They were trying to make something big and grand and exciting out of something that is not big and grand and exciting. It's ridiculous. First off, we knew about the coal fire. And when I say we, I don't mean us. I mean every Titanic historian already knew, yeah, there was a fire on the Titanic. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was burning before it set sail. Yes, it was in a coincidental location for the sinking. And yes, they did let it go to sea, knowing the ship had a smoldering coal fire inside of it. That's not new. They're not even the first documentary to cover it. I think I could probably list 3 or 4 that have already covered it in some extent, accurately or not.
Right.
Talking about it over the last 20 to 30 years since documentaries have become big. I know that there was that Untold Stories one from the 90s. They talked about it. And then there was the one hosted by Bill Paxton on Curiosities, What Sank the Titanic. They talked about it. None of this is new.
It was brought up in the inquiry, so it wasn't even considered a big deal, really.
They knew about it back then.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other claims that the documentary made within the first few minutes, not so much a claim, but a statement that they did, which is clearly for theatrics, it's clearly sensationalizing, and it is that they said that they have a special technique, an exclusive technique that they have perfected, which puts these old 2D photographs into real life. It animates them, it brings them into 3D, and then they would show a photograph, and then the camera would start zooming in, and you would see the depth of field change, things would change perspective, and the people in the photographs would start walking around. And for the inexperienced viewer, that is awesome. And that's really exciting. Even for me, I think that would have been pretty cool. If they didn't say it was some weird technique or some high-tech technique. It's not. It's CGI and guys and girls on green screen. That's it. It's actors. Ghosts of the Abyss by James Cameron did it back in 2002.
Yeah.
So,
and that's what they always do. Like whenever they don't really, sometimes when they don't really have a lot else to offer, they always show like their animations or their 3D graphics, and they'll say, now using the latest and cutting edge 3D graphics. They did that on a show once about like Roman armies and stuff, and it was basically just the graphics from a video game.
yeah. And then they say it's like cutting-edge technology that helps them bring the photographs back to life. Anyway, all right, this is all opinion stuff. This is us, I suppose, venting, but come on, guys. We had to sit through a 45-minute documentary. I think we deserve this. I'm reviewing my notes here to see what to talk about next. Now, I don't personally blame the journalists who came up with these photographs. I think a lot of the sensationalizing was done by the documentary crew. I think they blew it out of proportion. And then I also blame the press all around the world for making this a bigger deal than it really was.
Well, that's their job. You can't really blame them, per se. That's what they're there to do.
Well, but it's not news anymore. It's just like, here's something to be excited about.
Well, this is where the controversy begins.
Yeah, I know. I know. That's a whole other topic.
Yes. All right. Let's get to all right. Let's move on to.
All right.
From the sensationalist aspect of this documentary.
Back to the documentary. The only real thing that they brought to the table that's new were the photographs. Now, what?
The photographs.
The photographs. All right. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but they said that it's in 2 photographs that you can see. Actually, sorry. Wait, before we go into this, let's give a quick background.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, this is what the documentary claims. We all know that there was a coal fire on the Titanic, as we just said. It was in one of the bunkers, the coal bunkers. Now, the way these coal fires begin is natural. Actually, it's very natural. On ships like the Titanic and the Olympic and other large ships like Lusitania, the Mauritania, they pour the coal in through the coal chutes, and they go into the bunkers, which was along the watertight bulkheads, the boiler rooms. And this coal is sometimes stacked up 2, 3, 4 stories high, 40 feet. I don't remember offhand how tall the Titanic's coal bunkers were. I know it's a known statistic. I think
it's like 4 decks, technically. 3 to 4 decks, that one.
All right, thank you. So, coal builds up that high, which means the coal on the bottom of the pile is really being compressed. There's a lot of friction, there's a lot of built-up heat, and physics say that ultimately that will generate more and more heat, and it becomes prone to spontaneous combustion. It happened on the Titanic. That is where this coal fire began. And it's not a blazing fire. It doesn't threaten the ship. It doesn't break out and start burning passenger accommodations or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
All it is just smoldering. You know, it might glow red and spread out a little bit, but that's it. It's not threatening. In
And
fact,
the crew knew how to handle it.
yeah, the crew knew how to handle it. It's not uncommon. Relatively rare, but not uncommon. It would happen if you're on a ship and your job is a fireman or an engineer, you're almost guaranteed to have it happen at least once or twice during your career. So it happens. Everyone has the experience with it. The crew knew how to handle it, as you said. All right. So what this documentary claims is that there is a black mark on Titanic's hull, right where the fire was. And it's seen in 2 photographs, as put forward by this journalist, which are from his private collection, which he bought at auction. And he says that this is evidence that the fire was far bigger than it really was. It was far bigger than just a smoldering fire, and it is very likely that this contributed to the sinking of the Titanic because they say that the fire weakened the bulkhead and collapsed, thus sinking the Titanic.
After the iceberg damaged the room.
Yeah, after it hits the iceberg, implying that Titanic could have survived the iceberg damage and that it would have survived the damage, but the fire destroyed it, and that's what the ultimate killer was. That's what the documentary says.
That's what they say. But of
So-
course,
I believe it. I believe it all.
Yeah,
I've been swayed.
that
I've
bi-
seen the light. I've been converted.
I mean, it's true that, you know, if that black mark was really there, that would mean the fire was much bigger than it really was.
It would have spread. Yeah.
Because, you know, that would have meant the post office and baggage areas were on fire.
The squash court was on fire then.
Hang on, you guys are getting ahead of us. You're getting ahead of us.
Fire gets ahead of you, Tom. You got to stop, drop, and roll.
All right. So anyway, it's one of the key things that they claim is that it's in 2 different photographs from different angles. You could see it at 2 different angles. And they say, therefore, it's obviously not an artifact of the photography. It's obviously not an image issue. But here's the thing. They say it's on 2 photographs, when in fact, there were 3 photographs taken that day from very similar angles. And it's not in the 3rd photograph.
If you have any question that is from the same day, same angle, there's a lighthouse that's in the 3rd photograph that's seen with the 2 photographs.
Yeah, and the cables are in the same positions, smoke's coming out of the same places. It's the same thing. They were taken within minutes of each other. And
There's a bunch of men that are standing in the same position, too.
Yes!
So, yeah.
There's no smudge in that 3rd photograph. I do believe... yes? Yes. Now, the 3rd photograph, I think, is from a different camera. So, my thoughts are this black smudge is indeed in the photograph. It's not a development issue, but I think it's probably a smudge on the lens. So this camera takes one photograph, and then they move it slightly, and it's still there, but the camera's still pointed in the same position so that the smudge is in the same approximate position on the Titanic. And then this third camera comes along from a similar angle, doesn't have the smudge on it, or maybe he changes lenses, and now the smudge is gone. So, Kyle, repeat what you said. As you just said, you were muted from the public. So repeat that segment that you just said, please.
Well, if you look at the two photos that show the smudge, it's very clear that it's part of the camera because I mean it's if you look at it, actually the smudge changes positions on the ship. I mean unless it's like a magical moving burn spot.
Well, it is a magical burning blue spot.
It changes its position ever so slightly. So there's that piece of evidence.
And this is not uncommon for photography in 1912.
Yeah, I mean, it's not...
If you look at other photographs of Olympic, for instance, you'll find distortions and errors. Like the famous photograph of Olympic's propellers, for instance, you'll notice that some of the crew from Harlan Wolff who are posing with the propellers, they look like they're ghosts, for instance, because they're moving back and forth.
Right.
There's all sorts of like photography issues happening. So it's quite commonplace for this to occur.
All right, so here is the next exciting thing.
Not exciting.
No, actually, let's not jump right into that. Let's continue on. The documentary then goes on to say that the smudge on the side of the ship was so noticeable that it affected the way the Titanic's crew did their stuff. For example, Titanic reversed into its position, or it was turned around, I forget technically, but it was not facing the same way the Olympic was facing when it went to its quay at Southampton.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Instead, it was the side with the mark was facing away from where the passengers would have been, whereas the Olympic on its maiden voyage would have had that side facing in. So the documentary says, well, they wanted to hide that mark. They wanted to hide the fire, so they
Wrong.
went out of their way to for the ship to hide it. Yes, I know it's wrong, Matt. Why don't you say Matt, go ahead.
Wrong.
Wrong.
That was just a decision from, I believe Mark Crinside talked about this once, but it's a decision by Thomas Andrews that after Olympic was indeed docked for their starboard side at Southampton on her maiden voyage, and they decided that they were going to change that for Titanic. And speaking, what's
They
yeah.
changed it for all subsequent voyages of Olympic first.
Olympic was definitely after that for their port side at Southampton, yes. Another good point to bring up is that when first-class passengers boarded the Titanic at in France, in Cherbourg, what side of the ship did they board on the nomadic with? They pulled up alongside the nomadic on the starboard side.
Yeah, but that was nighttime almost.
It was not night. It was almost nighttime, but they're pulling up right alongside the bow of the Titanic to be like, I can just imagine Molly Brown looking up and be like, "What's that dark spot?"
Yeah, really loud and obnoxious.
Right. Yes.
All right, so
Yeah.
so that's made up. They take what is true, the fact that the ship was maneuvered in differently, and then they draw some irrelevant conclusion that supports their hypothesis.
But to bring up Southampton again, it's a good coincidence that I was looking when this all happened. I was like, okay, I'm going to look through all the photographs of the Titanic that we have in our collection, and I was going through some of the photos that Ken Marshall sent us, and it just so happened that months ago he sent a high quality photo of Titanic in Southampton waters as she's leaving. He sent the starboard forward section of Titanic, and he enhanced it for whatever reason he did. I don't know why, but he enhanced his segments for his paintings or whatever. So the hull was lightened so he could bring out the details. And it's right under the forward well deck, and it's a little bit aft, and it's to the bow. So it's that section of the ship that supposedly is supposed to have that dark spot that's supposed to be weakened and is hidden from the public. And there's nothing there whatsoever. There's no evidence of any distortion or deformity. There's no evidence of any paint job there's nothing there. You can see where there's rust. You can see where there's plates that have paint missing already from, age already on the Titanic, but there's nothing there in that spot where that smudge should be.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can very easily say that smudge was not there on the ship.
Yes.
Yeah. Another way to put it is,
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, wrong,
Yes.
wrong,
Yes.
wrong.
Yes.
You're wrong. You're wrong.
Anyway,
You're
Is that how we can
wrong.
This is a very serious topic. This is getting more serious as we go along.
more dramatic. I don't know what happened to Kyle. Maybe he just passed out right
I
there.
think he passed out. Kyle needs air. Kyle needs air.
I don't think you heard the thing that I put on, but they heard it.
Oh, they heard it? Oh, that's not fair.
Why would you do that to us?
Everyone's laughing, and we didn't get to hear it.
There's Dr. Cox from Scrubs saying, wrong, wrong, wrong.
Oh, for crying out loud. It's not fair that you get to do these things and get everyone else gets to hear it, and we don't get to hear it.
Yeah. All right. Anyway.
Way to just alienate us all.
Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that smudge really was there on the Titanic. That dark
Okay.
spot really was there. That's under the well deck. That's a few decks under the forward well deck of the Titanic on the starboard
Yeah.
side. That's not where the coal fire was.
Yeah, like I said, that smudge is like right where the I think it's right under the number 3 cargo hatch, and also the where the squash court would be.
Exactly. That's the cargo holds.
Yeah, it's the cargo hole and like I think reserve coal at the very least.
Yeah, but that coal wasn't on fire. This smudge is nowhere near where the real coal fire was. I mean, it's probably a good 50 feet forward. Now, even if that darkened spot is above the waterline. Tell me how that's going to affect anything.
Mhm.
All
Well,
right.
this is a raging fire. It's spread.
Well, stop it.
Yeah.
Stop it. All right. So their entire grounds for their argument is just completely been obliterated. I'm sorry, but it stands on nothing. But we're only a quarter of the way through our notes. Let's
Water.
Yeah, we're a quarter of the way through it.
Whoa. Okay.
They said that the bulkhead was warped. All right, so let's take out the black mark entirely. That's been discredited. The photographs are all discredited. Can the news please stop talking about it?
Okay. Yeah. Let's stick to the facts. Yes, there was a fire, and yes.
Now, there was a fire. It was in coal bunker W and Y.
Mm-hmm.
And it was talked about during the inquiries. And they said, yes, the metal warped. Yes, it was hot to the touch. Yes, it did distort the structure of that bulkhead. That's according to some testimony. I forget who. I don't believe it was Barrett. It was someone else. They actually mentioned it in the documentary. So they say all of this. And in the inquiry, they ask about it. So let's now evaluate the fact was that this was known, this was said, but was it kept a secret? Did they do some sort of cover-up? Because the documentary really implies that this is a cover-up, this was a conspiracy, they kept this quiet deliberately. In fact, the inquiries kept it quiet, according to the documentary. So these survivors testify that, yes, the bulkhead was distorted. But then they also said that they were told to keep this a secret from the passengers. They were threatened. If you told the passengers, you would be in trouble. Well, no kidding. No passenger wants to hear that their ship is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
If they find out that there's a coal fire down below, they're not going to know that this is not serious. They're not going to understand that this is no big deal, that this is common. They're going to blow it way out of proportion, just as everyone is doing now. They're going to flip out. I don't know. Have you guys ever seen the show Friends?
No.
I might have.
Yeah. I'm more so talking to our audience here.
Oh.
I know you guys are familiar with it. I'm sure a lot of people are, but I'm sure not everyone is. Anyway, they're sitting on an airplane on one episode, and one of the characters says there's something wrong with something on the wing. And she made it up. She completely made it up. It wasn't even a real word. I mean, it wasn't even a real airplane part. And the other friend was talking about how that's ridiculous. You're just making that up. But then everyone starts hearing it. And they're like, well, what's wrong with it? And then they call the flight attendants in, and the whole flight gets delayed. But that's the perfect example. People don't know what any of this is, and they blow it out of proportion.
Phalange.
And that's what, yes, thank you. That's what would have happened with the Titanic.
It's also kind of ridiculous because why would the firemen be around the passengers to begin with?
Exactly. So
They know better.
they were told to keep it a secret. I mean, I don't have evidence that they were told to keep it a secret, but if some of the firemen said we were told to keep it a secret, I'd believe it because that makes sense. And the documentary says they were told to keep it a secret. Now, was this kept a secret from the press? Not really. Was this kept a secret from the inquiries? Not at all.
Mm-mm.
So, in both the American and the British inquiries, survivors testified, yes, there was a fire down below. Yes, we had to put it out. But let's
And they did.
Yes, and they did. Let's look into it a bit further. We got to just take this at face value. Both inquiries decided that the fire did not contribute to the sinking. Now, the documentary says, oh, this is a conspiracy, this is a cover-up. But let's just take it at face value. Maybe they believed it. Maybe they genuinely said that. Let's look at the American inquiry. The whole reason the American inquiry happened was because an American senator, William Alden Smith, was very unhappy that the Titanic sank. It was an American-funded ship, and it was being operated by the British. So he did not like this. He talked to the President Taft, and he said, we got to investigate it, and he got the approval. So the crew was subpoenaed. They had to stay in New York, and they wanted to know, did you guys sink the ship? Did you guys do something wrong? Are you at fault? They were totally ready to fry the White Star Line if they felt there was reason to. They were totally ready to fry Harland and Wolff if they felt the need to. But they didn't. They would have been totally ready to say this was their fault. Because in their mind, this was an American ship. It was owned by the American Merchant or the International Mercantile Marine Corporation or Company, which was J.P. Morgan, an American, and it was working with the White Star Line, which was British. So the mindset back then was, you sank our ship, but they couldn't prove it. And they had the evidence of the fire. Now, if they thought that fire was anything, they would have taken it further than it really should have gone. But instead, they didn't. They said, all right, that fire is irrelevant. So my point here is the American inquiry would have been more sensitive to the idea that the ship sank because of negligence, and yet they still said no. One of the other bits of evidence that was mentioned in the documentary was Ismay was all secretive. They said he sent telegrams to New York telling the crew to get out as quickly as possible, to get on the next ship and go back home, and they said he even wrote his name in code, Yamsey, which is Ismay backwards. Well, according to people in Ismay's family, who I know and met in England, he did that a lot. That was just the way he wrote things. That was the way he sent telegrams, which can be intercepted by anybody, in a way so that the press didn't quite catch on to who he was, so that they didn't exploit it. So, you guys are being pretty silent. Are you still here?
Yeah, we're here.
I'm
okay,
here.
good. I wanted to make sure I wasn't talking to dead air here.
Nope.
So,
You had a thing, you were going with it.
I have a thing, yes. I'm still going with it, actually. So, lost my train of thought. But,
Gamzee.
Yamsey, yeah,
Yamsey.
I know. You can't blame him. Of course he wanted to be secretive because he was traumatized too. He did not want to deal with this. He was not ready to deal with this. He had a serious emotional burden. Yes, he didn't lose family on the Titanic, but he certainly blamed himself. So of course he wanted to avoid public scrutiny beyond what was necessary, beyond what was appropriate. I mean, this guy was a wreck inside, so for him to send discreet telegrams makes perfect sense. So back to the warped bulkhead. Yes, it was warped. Yes, they said it in both the American and the British inquiries. But the American and the British inquiries didn't see it as important. And the British inquiry was made up of maritime experts. They knew what they were talking about. There's a huge contrast between the American and the British testimony line of questions. The American was politicians. They all sat down and they asked questions from someone who clearly doesn't know much about ships. They were asking questions that they needed to know because they were learning about ships at the same time. And they also asked questions that they knew would be quoted by the press. So they asked, can you elaborate on this? Even the most trivial of things, because they wanted the public audience to understand every word. The British one was experts. They knew what they were talking about, and they disregarded the tedious questioning for the public audience because they wanted to get right to the heart of the matter. And honestly, I think both served a perfect purpose, and the two went hand in hand perfectly, because one was for the general audience, one was for the naval experts. So both of them came to the conclusion this fire was irrelevant. Anyone want to tap in?
What was that thing? I'm going back to the whole part about the inquiry, of how ridiculous the American inquiry was about the questioning, because apparently we didn't know anything about ships, and this might be a legend, but didn't someone ask Officer Lowe what an iceberg is made out of?
I don't remember this.
I swear that was a real thing, but I'm sorry. I
probably
just want to say, like, just how ridiculous it kind of was. But just to show that yes, that at the time that this kind of also could prove that, they were trying to cover something up, if you really want to put your conspiracy hats on. But I remember that being asked, like, what is an iceberg made of? And I think that, along the lines, it wasn't just that outright asked, like, was an iceberg made of, but it was along those lines. He said, ice, I believe, sir. But those are some of the questions that they got. Like every little question was asked,
Right.
like that could be possibly said.
I'm not going to defend that question. It could very well just be a stupid, obvious question. But there's a chance that he used the wrong words and he was asking, like, something along the lines of, like, could there have been
the British officer, I believe it was Lowe. He gave a cheeky response, like, I believe it is ice.
Yeah,
or,
I'm looking it up, and apparently it's just off the top of the results. It seems that he was asked what an iceberg was made of, and Lowe's response was ice, I suppose, sir.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's still that's the difference between the two.
Right. And it's for completely different audiences. The American one wanted to be presentable to the general public. The
American one was kind of a show.
The American one was kind of a show, yeah. But with reason. All right, so to jump back to the bulk.
Isn't that how it always is, though? British shows are always a little understated and all this, and American shows are always over the top. They focus on the theatrics more.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying that the inquiries were all about theatrics. I just mean it's more so generally acceptable or accessible. It's meant to be read by the general public back then. So.
Oh yeah, they had the public watching. So yeah.
Well, the public was totally tuned in.
They were there.
To the newspapers and listening.
They were there in the Myrtle room with them, and the American one. They were there in the. Okay. Anyway, yes.
Yeah, we're getting off topic. All right.
We could get off topic. We could go into a whole thing with the inquiry. Yeah.
So the bulkhead in question here was dividing boiler room 6 from 5. Both those compartments were ripped open by the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
All the way from the forepeak, the 3 cargo holds, boiler room 6 all the way across, according to Barrett, and then about 2 feet into the coal bunker of boiler room 5. Those 2 feet only went into the coal bunker. They didn't actually reach the main room of boiler room 5. So the ship was starting to go down. It was flooding up fast. They closed the watertight doors all throughout it. And then they moved into boiler room 5, and they kept it relatively dry. In fact, Frederick Barrett wasn't even sure if the pumps were running. It just wasn't flooding, and that's because they closed up the bunker door.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way they could do that was they just isolated the flooding coal bunker with the bunker door. The bunker door is not watertight. Do you understand what I'm saying here? I mean,
yeah, the bunker door is just designed it's the door to keep the coal from spreading out into the.
Yeah, the
boiler
bunker door is basically, I think, a vertical sliding door pulled by
It
a
resembles
chain.
a watertight door, but it's not
Yeah.
a watertight door.
Yeah, it's by no means watertight. It could probably hold back water a bit with the water coming through the sides, maybe, but
It's on a track, I believe.
it's on a vertical track. It's vertical sliding, and like it's
And there's a book hidden in one of them.
yeah, and it's there's no way that could hold back water. Once the bunker would have filled up to a certain degree, it would have burst because the water would have been flowing over that bulkhead and down into the bunkers.
Well, this is the perfect segue, actually. See, Boiler Room 5 was beginning to flood because of the 2 feet that were ripped open. But by closing that bunker door, they were able to make Boiler Room 5 dry. The water was held within that coal bunker. And that door is not designed to hold water. Yes, it was kind of watertight, but not structurally watertight. Water was not leaking through it, but it was not strong. It wouldn't be able to take the pressure. It did up until a certain point, and then that door burst, which is what a lot of people have mistaken for the bulkhead collapsing. That door burst in, and they had to quickly evacuate out. That was what people believed was the bulkhead collapse. So the water was already coming in right from the sea, from the damage in Boiler Room 5, going right into the coal bunker. They isolated that with the non-watertight door just to buy some time. I mean, there's nothing else they could do. They did this, and it bought the ship an extra maybe half hour. So that's what they did right there. The collapse of that bunker door had absolutely nothing to do with the fire. Absolutely nothing, because it was never designed to withhold water. It did, luckily, and it bought them maybe 20 minutes to a half hour. But then it collapsed and flooded Boiler Room 5. It was not the warped bulkhead. Warping has nothing to do with that once it cools down again.
If a watertight bulkhead collapsed, then there's no way that any of them in that boiler room would have escaped.
Yeah.
Barrett was down there and he got out in time.
If that bulkhead went, that would have flooded within moments, and the ship would have
right.
Like it would have. If you've seen the movie Titanic from 1953, when they're all singing "Near My God to Thee," and then something just blows up, and then the ship just plummets, that's basically what it would have been like, minus the explosion. It would have just plummeted to a certain degree.
Even in A Night to Remember, they, I believe, Heskett, the fireman comes down the ladder and yells like the bulkhead's going, and you see like this water pouring down from above. It'd be like 100 times faster than that.
Yeah,
it would be just this cascade of water like flowing in from the boilers because they couldn't do the special effects at the time. The whole room would just implode in with water, and on the boat deck, it would basically be the plunge of the ship.
yeah,
That's what it would be like. And when that door did give in, it was around like what time was estimated to be like 1:10? Did we say it was? I forget already.
I don't remember. It was in the 1 o'clock hour.
Yes, because Barra obviously got up and then he left on lifeboat 13.
Right. And that left at a certain time, relatively early in the sinking. Not towards the end, I should say. Not early, but
right.
Not...
I think it was 1:40. I think it was 1:40, and he had like a half hour before, so I think it was 1:10.
Okay. So the fire was real, but the marks were irrelevant in the photographs. Both inquiries agree that the fire was irrelevant to the sinking, and that is not what caused the collapse and the inflow of water. It was the non-watertight door finally giving out. What also annoyed me about this documentary is I felt like they were making several pathetic grabs at any conspiracy they possibly could. For example, they said, well, the coal was running out, so they obviously had to speed to New York so that they wouldn't get stranded in the middle of the ocean. That's fun. I never heard that one before. But it does touch on the speeding conspiracy, that Titanic was going too fast. They were being reckless. Titanic was going at a normal speed for a ship of that size, even through an ice field. They were not trying to break any speed records because Titanic was not fast. And as far as I'm aware, the final boiler room was never lit until the sinking, just to keep the electricity going. But during the sailing, during the functional career of the Titanic, that final boiler room was never lit. And if that was never lit, then clearly the ship was not going at top speed, nor was it trying to go at top speed. Am I right?
That's correct, yeah.
If it arrived a day early,
Oh, here we go with this whole thing.
that would have been a logistical nightmare. All right, I won't go into any further, but I mean, all these passengers had tickets for trains booked the next day. They have hotels booked the next day. Titanic would have to like sit out in the water. It doesn't even have a clear pier in New York until that day. So Titanic could not arrive early. So there was no point to speeding up. So another one of the claims by the documentary that is literally just them trying to be sensationalizing. But then they also touch on brittle steel. It's like they can't make up their mind as to what sank the Titanic. I thought it was a fire, you guys were saying earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's brittle steel. They mentioned the brittle steel, and they bring up this letter. I don't remember who the letter was from. It was sent to Harland and Wolff, and they were making some sort of claim about the steel being substandard. And then Harland and Wolff writes back and says the steel is adequate. And they had some narrator reading it, saying adequate with an angry voice. And they emphasized it a lot. And it's like, when did adequate suddenly come to mean inadequate? They say that adequate is not perfect.
Yeah.
It's the best steel available, but adequate means adequate. Come on, guys. It's not a secret code for inadequate. They're not saying this is the worst steel we can find. They're saying this is functional steel. This works.
Yeah. They were like the narrators and all that. They were making this big deal out of it. Oh, Titanic, special ship, extra strong, made of extra special steel. And then Harlan Wolff in their letter, they said, I think they used, I don't remember what word they used. It was something like regular steel, normal steel, something like that. Adequate
Pretty sure
steel.
Olympics still survive.
It wasn't adequate. It was something. I need to go back and look. But it was, yeah, it was just like, oh, it was standard steel. It was, and they're like, oh, wow, they didn't use special steel in the Titanic. Oh, that's a conspiracy.
Well, they say it's brittle, but there have been so many tests done with Titanic and Olympic steel using spare steel that was left over from the shipyards. They would test it, and then they would also use the same chemical compounds in fresh steel and test it, and then they would also test it from metal that was actually salvaged from the wreck. And guess what? Every single piece of the steel passes the tests, even by today's standards. This was a well-built ship with very good material. So can we finally please put that brittle steel thing to rest? They like to say that, well, with the cold temperatures of the water, it gets even more brittle and it'll pop. No, not how it works. Because first off, on the opposite side of the hull are the engines and the boilers and all sorts of hot stuff. And they only just went into cold water. The only stories of brittle steel on ships that actually had brittle steel, the only stories of those hulls buckling were when the ship was stopped for an extended period of time in icy water. Then they start having rivets start popping. And even then, I'm unaware of circumstances where the ship actually went down. So stop saying brittle steel. Stop saying inadequate metal or inadequate rivets. Titanic was well built. They knew what they were doing. And then they bring up the ultimate conspiracy. They didn't bring it up. I think they didn't want to say the word.
They didn't want to say it exactly.
Yeah, but they implied it. See, we all are familiar with the conspiracy that Titanic was switched with the Olympic after the Olympic had an accident. No, we're not even going to talk about it. We're not even going to go into it. It's just...
Maybe we should.
We will another time, all right? But it's just insanity to even think about it. So the documentary was talking about how they let the ship go out into the water knowing it was on fire. It was as though they knew something would happen to it. And they're hinting at deliberately being sunk. And this was right after they talked about the damage to the Olympic. So maybe the fresh audience watching this without any background knowledge wouldn't pick up on it, but conspiracy theorists would be like, oh my gosh, this confirms it. So I felt like they were pandering to every possible fringe audience that might watch them. Anyway, it's just outright ridiculous. This documentary was just one of the worst I have seen, and that's my personal opinion. I'm treating this as a review in a way. This is more of an opinion review. Go check it out if you really want to. In fact, we've never even addressed a documentary to give our own opinion, but we feel we have to with this because it was so almost insulting to the Titanic, to people who were on board, to the crew, the engineers, the firemen, to Ismay. It's insulting to the people who built the ship. And honestly, for the documentary crew to have made this, for the journalists to have made these claims, it's just, I think the only word I'll say is unprofessional.
And it's
Especially to the crew.
What's that, Matt?
Especially to the crew, because they knew how to handle this fire.
Yeah.
They knew how to put it out.
Well, that's another good segue because there's more I want us to talk about. But first, what's everyone saying? Because I'll be honest with you, I haven't been reading the chat. I know Kyle has been. So, Kyle, why don't you fill me in on what some of these comments are, and tell me how people have been talking about this. What are people's reactions here?
It's hard to say. There's a lot of there's no specific reaction. General talk, a lot of jokes.
Yes.
Matt?
Let's see. Oh, I've read it. It's kind of fun. A lot of people think we're upset.
I'm just.
We're not upset. It's fun.
Someone's tinfoil hat is glowing. That's probably because of the fire.
Anyway,
what is fun was once this. I'm going to tell a little tidbit about once this started the trend on Facebook, and it was news reports on CNN or the nightly news or what have you, is that we started to get swamped on our email and Facebook messages saying, just heard about this new fire, you're going to change it put it into the game, the new theory. And I had to create a new automated response for this to respond to everybody about it. So that was interesting. That was interesting.
They don't question it. They just message us and say, "You're putting this in the game, right?" No, because it's not true. So we're not putting it in the game. Thank you. And I mentioned this during the Titanic live stream we did yesterday, but we get a lot of people with conspiracy theories coming in, and they think this confirms it. Because, I mean, the documentary honestly was trying to pander to them anyway. And they said, well, obviously it was deliberately sunk. Or I heard J.P. Morgan personally was putting explosives in it. And you can't tell them otherwise. You can't give them facts and say, that's not true. You really shouldn't believe everything you hear. And instead, then they just think we're part of the conspiracy. And they think we're obviously paid off by the White Star Line or the Illuminati or something.
I got my check the other day.
Yeah, I got mine too.
Oh, really? I didn't get mine yet.
Oh, you'll get it soon.
Right.
And that's why like I said yesterday, we planned this out, 104 years ago to burn down the Titanic.
Yeah, I've had roles in other major recent catastrophes too. I'm not going to tell you which ones, but
yeah.
I've got my fair pay.
And this all just makes total sense. That's why even we got millions of dollars out of this. Therefore, we're still asking for contributions for this project, and we're still looking for investors, even though we got millions of dollars out of sinking the Titanic.
There you go.
It all makes sense.
Yeah. Anyway, real quick note: I'm sure for those of you who have been with us for for a long period of time, since our earlier podcasts, since this project was beginning, you'll notice our attitude has kind of changed towards conspiracy theorists. And we don't mean it personally. We certainly don't mean it personally, but you get tired after a while of hearing the same stuff and not being able to show them facts and say, listen to reason, please. Instead, everything just adds to the puzzle to them. And, I get when you first hear it, you hear that maybe the ship was switched, and you don't know enough of the background that you think, well, maybe it's possible. But once you're presented with all of the evidence, and you're told, and you're shown, and you're proven that it's impossible to actually do it, and you still believe it, we can't deal with that anymore. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, they're just. I used to think earlier on when I was first found out about all these conspiracy theories, oh, maybe you can argue with them, but the same conclusion I've come to is that you can't. There's literally no arguing with many of these people who are dedicated to believing in these conspiracy theories. They will just tell you that you're a shill. I mean, there are still people who don't believe that a plane hit the Pentagon, and you get these really obvious, or you get these really obvious things that are obviously wrong. I mean, and they think they know better because they think, oh, it happened. They think in their mind, this is how it should have happened, or this is what I think, and they don't bother to actually look at the facts or listen to the experts because obviously the experts are paid to, that's it, and they just want to believe what they want to believe. And
Right.
no matter how wrong it is or how horrible
It's
the
easier to
evidence is.
believe instead of looking at evidence sometimes.
All right, before we get too far off, the reason we're talking about this is because this documentary is basically all conspiracy theories, in a sense. It does ultimately take that track. It says the ship was speeding, it was poorly built, and it implied at one point that the ships might have been switched. So that's the reason we're talking about this so much. That's why we're addressing the conspiracy theory really briefly here. Now, here's the ironic thing about that fire. And this is a very interesting theory. I would go so far as to say it's leaving the theory realm and actually becoming simple fact. And by the way, I mean theory. I don't mean conspiracy theory. But the fact is, the fire more than likely helped save the Titanic as far as it did. Now, this is by our historian, Park Stevenson, who has done extensive research on this. He's worked with James Cameron. He's worked with other historians. Some of them are our historians, such as Bill Souter, Ken Marshall. And he did a fantastic article about this, which was published about 2 years ago. And it was about how the coal fire was Titanic's guardian angel, in a way. And I believe it. I certainly believe it. It makes perfect sense. And Parks is not the kind of guy to throw around ideas and hypotheses. He'll really research it before making any of these claims. So let me lay out a synopsis of his statement, which he's worked with us. And this is really what we believe. And in fact, it's what we will be showing in our game. So, that said, let's look at Frederick Barrett's testimony. And for those of you who don't know, Frederick Barrett was one of the firemen. He was in charge of the watch of firemen. He was basically the lead fireman in Boiler Room 6 at the time of the iceberg collision. He was there, and he saw the hull get ripped open, 2 feet above the floor, ripped open, and the water come rushing in. He also was one of the guys in charge of putting this fire out. Yes, the fire was extinguished on the Titanic before it started to sink. I believe it was either that day or the day before.
I think it was Saturday, so yeah.
Okay, so the day before the sinking. His testimony puts the fire in coal bunkers Y and W. And that, as I said, is the coal bunker that surrounds the watertight bulkhead that was between boiler rooms 5 and 6, which essentially is a critical point for the sinking, because that is where the ship needed to be watertight. And again, that is not where the sludge was in the photograph. The easiest way to extinguish these coal fires is to remove the coal from the burn point, because as I said, it's caused by compression. the coal is stacked too high and it combusts at the bottom. So you got to just shovel all the coal out of there until the pressure is alleviated and you can extinguish the embers. So now they have 600 tons of coal in that bunker. Between W and Y, each of them holding 300 tons of coal. Together they hold 600. All of that needs to be shifted out of the coal bunker. Now that's too much to burn as you're pulling it out. That's way too much. You'd be burning it too fast. You'd be getting the heat too high. You start risking blowing up the boilers. The ship's not going the proper speed to be running all of that. So you got to put it somewhere. And the most logical place to put it would be in another coal bunker that's not on fire. And the closest one would be the port side. You only got to walk a few feet to shift the coal. All right, so you start draining all of the coal out of the starboard coal bunker, because yes, this coal bunker was on the starboard side. Start emptying all the coal out, putting it in wheelbarrows. The trimmers are carrying it over and dumping it into the port side or left side coal bunkers. And eventually you got 600 tons shifted from the starboard over to the port side. That's a significant amount of weight being shifted. That's a difference of 1,200 tons. And on a ship that is this size, that's still noticeable. In fact, by Saturday, the day that this was all taken care of, the coal was finally fully shifted, and the fire was extinguished, Lawrence Beasley, a second-class passenger who was also a science teacher, he's well known for his observations. He's one of our most credible witnesses of the sinking of all the passengers. He said on Saturday the ship was leaning to port. In fact, he went to his favorite spot on the boat deck, which was right by lifeboats 15 and 13. And he looked out over the railing and he watched the horizon, and he calculated that the ship is significantly leaning more to port than it is to starboard. In fact, a couple passengers, Ruth Becker being one, said that when she looked out her window on the port side, she did not see the horizon. She only saw the ocean. Now, Bill Souter, our historian, calculates the ship was leaning 3 degrees over to the port side. Leaning to the port. So opposite the side that the fire was on, now it's leaning over to the port. Bill calculates 3 degrees. Ken Marshall, another one of our historians, calculates 2.3. So Parks Stevenson averages that out to 2.5. So that's 2.5 degrees leaning over to the side. Now you might think that's a bit ridiculous. You might think, how can only a few people notice this? Well, let me cite Ken Marshall. He did an interview with the Titanic channel. And if you guys are not familiar with Titanic channel, it's a subscription service where you log into this website, and every day they have new Titanic content from historians, and it's great content. We're all members. We recommend you go check that out. But in one of Ken Marshall's segments, he says he was advising for James Cameron on the famous 1997 film. And they were walking the deck when it was sinking, when it was in the downward position, and the deck was tilted 6 degrees down. He says after a few minutes, you don't even realize it. 6 degrees. That's more than the 3 degrees to port. And he says you don't even realize. And when you add the fact that the ship is rolling back and forth a little bit in the waves, it's even harder to notice. And it was actually quite common for ships to lean back then. In fact, the German ocean liner, the Imperator, was nicknamed the Limp Imperator because it was always leaning over. Even modern ships lean occasionally. All right, so flash forward a little.
All the time.
Yes.
Practically.
So flash forward a little bit. Parks was talking to Parks was talking to Jim Cameron, and he explains this in his article, and he wants to put together a computer analysis, an engineering analysis in like some really high-tech programs that calculate physics and flooding, and he wants to simulate how the Titanic would sink. I forget if this was to test this theory or not, but ultimately it did. And so they program the ship in, they put the proper weight in, they distribute the weight, they calculate all of it, and then they do the proper damage. that the iceberg would have done. And the ship starts sinking in the animation, and it rolls over. It capsizes to starboard, because remember, Titanic hit the iceberg on the starboard, or the right side of the ship. And it rolls over. It flips over to starboard. If you'll notice, a lot of ships flip over. The Costa Concordia recently in Italy, the Andrea Doria, the Lusitania, even Titanic's near structurally identical sister ship Britannic flipped over, as you saw in our live stream yesterday. But Titanic, in reality, did not flip over. But this computer engineering software simulator says Titanic flipped over to starboard about 1 hour after the collision, which is about when Britannic flipped over, by the way. And it's also the same amount of time Andrews estimated that Titanic had left after the collision, an hour. And the program says Titanic flips over. But then it triggered with Parks that they're starting the animation on an even keel. But according to testimony, according to this coal fire, ship was actually leaning almost 3 degrees over to the port. You factor that 3 degrees over to port into the computer animation, and it doesn't capsize because it's counterweighted. The water comes rushing in the starboard side, starts pulling it over to the starboard, but the ship is already leaning almost 3 degrees over to the port, so it starts countering that. The ship balances itself out, and it starts leaning over to starboard, but it doesn't go as far as it could for it to capsize. It maybe only goes over maybe 6 or 7 degrees. And then Scotland Road starts flooding, which is on the port side of the ship, and gives access to all the port compartments. And just as it starts nearing that point of wanting to capsize to starboard, port side starts flooding. And then you have that open gangway door start flooding that Officer Lightsoller ordered open at the D-deck reception room. Now port side starts flooding. And I wish you could see me right now because I'm making gestures with my hand. But you can't see that. So instead of flipping over to starboard, now the coal fire and the coal shift has helped the ship stay stable long enough that now it starts counter-flooding on the port side along Scotland Road, and now it starts leaning over. But the ship has so much water in it now that it can't flip over just yet. It leans 10 degrees over, it kind of peaks out at 10 degrees, starts settling down into the water, as you see in our real-time sinking, and it goes down. If the Titanic capsized an hour in, that is before even one lifeboat escaped. An hour after the collision, none of the lifeboats left. I believe it was an hour and 5 minutes later. Now, even if they hastened with the evacuation, if the ship was going to capsize, it would be leaning far sooner. And therefore, the lifeboats would not have been able to launch at all anyway. In that cold, with ships that far away, with no lifeboats being able to escape before the entire ship suddenly rolls over, before some passengers are even awake. We're legitimately talking about a ship that could have sank in the middle of the ocean with 0 survivors. Now, without that coal fire, that's genuinely what could have happened. So, I agree with Parks, saying that that coal fire saved everyone who survived, including Frederick Barrett and Lawrence Beasley. So had that fire not been there, it's very possible that no one would have survived. Isn't that incredible? So now this documentary, which hasn't put any thought into it whatsoever, comes out and says this coal fire is what actually sunk the Titanic. This coal fire doomed it. That the crew didn't know what they were doing. That the ship was poorly built. That's insulting. Because actually I think that fire saved them. And we're going to be showing that in the game, by the way. Kyle, what are the comments saying?
A lot of people are. Some people are talking about. Some people are saying that they also believe Parks, and someone asked if it was on the final word. Someone.
The Final Word was an excellent documentary with James Cameron, and that's the computer simulation that does it. But they don't mention that it's restrained because of the coal fire. They just didn't have the time to go into it. But that's actually the computer simulation that they do.
There was one point that someone brought up, and it doesn't change. It doesn't change anything. They said, "Oh, what's the evidence that the coal was shifted to the other side and not just used up?" And the thing is, like, if it was shifted, then yeah, that would shift weight to the other side. If it was just used up, or at least for the most part, that would still leave a big void on the starboard side, which would still cause it to lean to port. And regardless of what was done with the coal, the ship still had a list. That's a fact. And that's what ended up saving it.
Exactly. That list is what saved it. And there's nothing on board that would have caused a list before the collision apart from shifting the coal, which would only have been done to put out the fire. Because if you're burning the coal naturally, you do it evenly. That's what the trimmers are there for. The trimmers are the ones who shift the coal around, and they deliver it to the stokers. They're called trimmers because they keep the ship on trim. And their job is to make sure the coal is dispersed evenly and used evenly so that the ship stays as level as possible. So if the ship is leaning 3 degrees over on what is being billed as the most beautiful, the most luxurious, the most powerful, the largest, and the safest ship in the world, for them to be willing to have a 3-degree port list on its first voyage, you know it's technically an emergency. Now, it might not be a real emergency of a danger or anything like that, but you know it's some sort of odd circumstance, such as a coal fire.
I believe the purser in second class said to someone that they were probably shifted the coal. And that
Yes.
was causing the list as well, right?
That was Lawrence Beasley. He asked the purser, "Why are we listing this much to port?" And the purser said, I don't know the purser's exact words, but according to Beasley, it was something like they are probably using the coal and shifting it around. So even the purser, who has spent his whole life on steamships, recognizes that if the ship is listing like that, it's because of the coal. So, I believe that certainly puts the documentary to bed.
They put it out.
Yes, it certainly
Smothered it.
It extinguished the documentary. So, the documentary was a waste of time. I do not believe it deserves the attention it has been getting. In fact, it took us 2 weeks for us to even address it. But the simple fact is people are believing it. People are eating it up, and they're spreading it, and we're getting
Like
constantly...
wildfire.
Like,
Yes,
oh, God, like a wildfire. And
It's spreading like a raging coal fire.
And the worst thing about it is it's just a
Coal fire
lot of
doesn't spread.
fluff. There were a few portions of a few seconds where I just had to skip it because it was like the Titanic is the biggest ship in the world. We all know the story, and all that. And then, or the little breaks after the commercials where they just go over this, like they spend 5 minutes going over what you missed over the 5 minutes ago, and then it's a lot of people showing the photos to other people and having them going, wow, it's a black mark. Obviously, that means something. And a lot of dramatic music, and we have cutting edge, fancy graphics and stuff. And there just wasn't any substance to it. There wasn't anything new. There wasn't anything interesting. There wasn't anything that was really even. It just, yeah.
Exactly. So
Dramatics.
now they went to a engineer. They talked to this one. I forget what he was an engineer of. I don't remember if it was specifically naval engineer or if it was just a metal engineer. But they showed it to him, and he said, "Yeah, that makes sense. That fire must have been going on for several weeks. But now I'm not discrediting that guy. I'm sure he knows what he's talking about. But at the same time, he doesn't know Titanic. He doesn't know this ship. He doesn't know these circumstances. He was presented with, here's a photograph, here's a theory, does it make sense? And he says, yeah, it kind of makes sense. And yeah, the theory kind of makes sense until you apply it to all of the other facts about the Titanic. So this poor engineer wasn't even given the full story. So that fire could not have been smoldering for several weeks because coal wasn't even loaded onto the ship that early, as far as I'm aware. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I might be. But as far as I'm aware, coal was not on the ship that long.
The fire probably started at least not even a week. I mean, it was from sea trials on.
Yeah, the sea trials was April 2nd. Titanic had its fire extinguished April 13th. That's 11 days. That's not even 2 weeks. So this documentary was just a pathetic attempt to sell some new BS theory, and the worst part is it worked. So they must have known they were wrong. They must have known this was fake, and they got their views. They went viral, so they succeeded with their intentions. Because their goal was not to educate. If their goal was to educate, they'd be doing what we're doing. They would be talking about the facts and explaining it to people. But instead, their goal is to...
Titanic's a very popular subject still.
Their goal is to get views and make money and sell advertising at whatever cost, even if it means making up stuff. And that's... I think that's wrong. Anyway, now we're getting back into opinion. That's it. Those are the facts. Those are the facts that we've assembled.
Let's talk about some other facts that we assembled. How about that Titanic switch controversy?
Seriously? Really? Oh, what are you doing?
What do you mean? What am I doing?
Sounds like water.
What?
There's a train going by.
Train.
I'm pretty sure I said in the event that we might talk about other conspiracies, possibly.
Let's talk about all of the conspiracies. Why not?
No, there's too many to talk about. What about? Is there any other like bizarre conspiracies besides the obvious ones?
Yeah, like some weird, like some obscure group sank it, like the Jesuits or something like that. There's a conspiracy, like the Jesuits.
That's still a commonplace one, but isn't there like a weird one?
Well,
Are there any weird ones?
It's not a conspiracy theory, but there's a little fun idea that people have, or it's like, well, maybe Titanic sank because of all the time travelers going back onto it. And
Oh,
there's too much
okay.
weight. But that's I don't think
all
it's
right.
like a serious theory. It's just a joke.
Oh yeah,
Maybe.
that makes sense.
And,
That's not fair. I haven't
and
even
there-
gone there yet.
Yeah, and there was the other. I don't know if it's. I think some people tie it in with the switch theory. Or there's another theory that it was sunk in order to kill the millionaires who opposed the Federal Reserve.
There's that one too, yeah.
I found it hilarious that someone actually believed that J.P. Morgan himself was placing explosives. You know, not only was he some massive business tycoon and inventor and all this stuff, but he was also an explosives expert.
I don't see how he could be incognito and do that with his nose.
Yeah, and isn't he also a little portly?
Yeah, he was portly, and he was very distinguishable. I mean, you could tell when you see J.P. Morgan, you see J.P. Morgan.
Yeah,
So yeah.
He was very portly. He spent a lot of time in ports.
So you just imagine him carrying a wooden crate of explosives past a bunch of shipyard workers, and it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
nothing to see.
Yeah, much.
No, if you took his photograph, he's gonna kick your butt.
Yeah,
so,
much
I mean, like,
much like how people obviously manage to carry hundreds of tons of thermite past a lot of office workers.
yeah, everyone look up J.P. Morgan. So you can look up J.P. Morgan like attacking a photographer. so you can see a good photo of him. But anyway, yeah.
Does he really do it?
He didn't like his photograph taken.
Okay then.
Yeah.
All right, so I don't know. I mean, I don't even keep track of these conspiracies anymore. There's so many ridiculous ones, but you also don't know what you can count as a conspiracy theory, because if someone makes a random statement, I mean, that's technically a conspiracy theory. You know, if someone just makes something up and says aliens, or the captain was an alien or a reptile or something, even if one person says it, technically that's a conspiracy theory.
And in that case, a lot of people have a lot of weird ideas.
Yes.
The funny thing is just, when it comes to these conspiracy theories, it's just how wrong and how bad the evidence is. Like how there are some, on some pages you'll see people saying, here's the evidence that ships were switched. And they'll put a photo up. It's like, this is Titanic and this is Olympic. But actually, either both ships are Olympic or their captions are
They're
wrong.
both Titanic.
Yeah, or they're both Titanic, or it'll be other things that are just simply ignorant of the historical context. Like they'll say, "Oh, look at this, the name changed places on the hull. Isn't that weird?" It's like, well, no, they just scratched the name in one photo. That's what they did back then. Or these portholes over here, when it was launched, they had this many over here on the under the forecastle. There are 2 here, and then when it was sailing, there were 4 there. What is that about? What is that? Weirdness. Wow. And it's like, well, that's just because they added a couple portholes. Simple act of cutting a couple portholes into the steel. That's it.
Right.
It was just changes they made during construction. It wasn't. They didn't. It doesn't. You know, it's just the ignorance of.
I could imagine that they would change that ship from this point and then that point. No, they never do that.
And,
I don't know.
yeah.
Is there anything else?
No, I don't think there's any other conspiracy theories. I mean, there's no other. I mean, there's gonna be more documentaries. There's always gonna be Titanic documentaries that are gonna be interesting. That's how I'm gonna put it.
It
That we're
will.
gonna have. You know,
Yeah.
they'll be interesting
Mhm.
as we said, Titanic is a subject that's going to be covered for many, many years to come, decades until the end of time,
Yep.
perhaps.
And we'll be here until the end of time to debunk them.
I suppose. I guess we're going to have to become like Titanic documentary reviewers now.
No,
Oh
just
dear,
this,
now we're committed.
just this one. Just this one.
Hopefully.
I mean, I get how some of them will try to sell the theatrics, and it's fun. You know, it's partially.
Well, you want your documentary to do well. That's the point.
Absolutely, and I get that. You know, like the Bill Paxton one. You know, that was fun.
There's some bizarre things going on in that one.
There were, but it was still fun.
Like some water exploding out of like sinks. I didn't understand.
No, I know, but this one was just infuriating.
There's
This-
some wackadoo stuff.
I know. All right. Well, anyway, anything else? Anything else, guys?
No, we just need some really good Titanic documentaries. I guess the problem is that a lot of the stuff we know has already been went over, and now they just sort of latch on to these ideas.
What's your favorite
these
Titanic
new
documentary?
ideas, these new ideas, and there's not much there, so they have to bloat it and add theatrics and just make it completely pointless. Because I mean, not since Final Word and others around that time and earlier have there really been any decent documentaries about Titanic. They've all been fluff and just, oh, look at this. And there hasn't really been anything that good or interesting.
What are some of the questions? Do we have any questions here in the audience regarding the documentary? Specifically this documentary or the theories and claims that it makes.
All right, yeah. Let's. Have any questions about this documentary specifically?
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about what document. I just asked like, what's their favorite documentary, and everyone's talking about what their favorite documentary was.
Mm.
And a lot of people like the A&E documentary or the National Geographic one. I think I see Secrets of the Titanic. Titanic at 100. Yes.
I really.
During the Titanic. Oh, I forgot about During the Titanic.
Train the Titanic. Oh my god.
Oh
like a
god, that one.
I couldn't even watch it.
That was another one. That was another one that went on a really big gimmick. Oh, look at our terrible 3D model of Titanic. Let's drain it.
The problem with Drain the Titanic was I think that it was stating that the way of the breakup was not seen by it had to happen at the under the water, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, they.
However, it's too many people. There's too many survivor reports of seeing the ship break
Yeah,
above the water.
Yeah, and their whole graphic about clearly it's because of the distribution of debris being all over the place, and it's like, and then they show it, and it's like a particle emitter shooting debris out from the
It looks like
bow
a perfect umbrella of debris.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I think the best one of the debris, the better, the good of the good, the
Yeah.
gooder of the recent wreckage documentaries are the Final Word and the one on the History Channel or the National Geographic. The National Geographic one is the Final Word one, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and then the one on the History Channel with Parks and Ken and Bill.
Yeah.
Is it Discovery? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I forgot. History Channel, I think, or is it?
Mystery
No,
Solved.
I think it's National. No, it was National Geographic.
Titanic at
Mystery-
100 Mystery Solved was History Channel.
And then National Geographic was the Final Word.
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked Mystery Solved because I felt like it was more investigative, but I also liked Final Word because I felt like it was.
It had Jim ripping a banana in half.
That's worth it in itself.
That was the best part.
But yeah, that Drain the Titanic actually, I think, suffers the same general issues that this latest one does. It's a lot of theatrics. Well, not as much. A lot of dramatic stuff. A lot of
They had that the whole flashy aspect.
the whole
to it.
flashy
Here's the
aspect,
Titanic out of the ocean.
that whole gimmick thing, and it had that same problem also where they just spend like half the time just recapping what you missed since the last commercial break, and I hate that. And then a lot of repeating stuff. There wasn't much to it. And then of course it had the standard. Here's a guy who has a theory, and now people are believing it.
See, my favorite one of all time, which everyone has a couple people have mentioned, is one that doesn't have theories. It was just a documentary based on facts and testimony and stories, which was the A&E documentary from I think 1990. Gosh, 4. It was the Titanic: Death of a Dream and Titanic: The Legend Lives On, which you should buy, everybody. But you can also find it on YouTube. That one's I think is the best one, and Ken Marshall is in it, and so are Charlie Haas and Jack Eaton, who we've both met and been with, and I think also is P.H. Nargilly in it. I don't think so, but so it's really good, and a lot of the survivors are in it too before they passed away, and it's just I think it's one of the best documentaries out there. And that one doesn't have any theories. It just has, there's nothing really there's no flashiness about it. It's just presenting facts and stories. It's just what you need in a Titanic documentary. There's no hype. It is the Titanic.
Yeah, that's the ideal documentary. No hype, just facts. Even if it's something that is new.
It's substance. Yeah.
Even if it's something that is new, it should be substantiated. And the problem with a lot of documentaries is that it's just theories. It's people going, you know what? I actually think it was, this, that, or the other thing that caused this, and it happened a different way, and it's always based on some flimsy evidence, and it's just hype. It's just theories. It's hype, not even theories, certainly not in the scientific sense. And
no, I mean, then there was Ghost of the Abyss. Yeah, that wasn't a theory based one either. That was just a good documentary. It was a good story.
Yeah,
that was like a story of a dive to the Titanic.
It was the story of Jake and Elwood.
It was, yeah.
I enjoyed that one.
I like watching Jake and Elwood and their little adventures in the bottom of the ocean now.
Yeah, they ditched their cop car and now they're in subs.
Yes.
And Jake's always getting into trouble. I always feel bad when I watch Jake. I think it was Jake.
Oh, every time.
Which one died?
I don't know, but I just remembered that poor sad sub that's still stuck in the Turkish bath.
Oh, that's an Xbox, isn't it?
That's an Xbox 360.
It's an Xbox. I don't care when I watch that video and it suddenly dies on me. Well, I kind of do. I get really upset when I'm watching the ROV footage and it's getting really close to going to the electric bath and suddenly it cuts out and I'm like, What? Oh yeah, I forget. I can't get there. But still, it's an X bot. I don't feel any sort of like connection to that one because they didn't name it.
Well, I
They
think
named Gilligan and they named Jake and they named Elwood and I forgot to name
Well-
the other one, but they didn't name the other one. But
well,
anyway,
clearly that bot died because it suffered the red ring of death.
I guess that's why, yeah. Or it was on fire because that's what the fire was about, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, the fire was there. God, even after all these years, it still didn't stop burning.
See, guys, the fire was that intense that even after 90, what year was it? 95 years, it was still burning. My God.
Did you know the pool is still full?
Yeah, that trends a lot on Facebook too.
God.
All right. Any questions about the this documentary?
Any questions at all?
About not any questions at all about the documentary.
Oh yes, about the documentary, of course.
Because we're going to, well, I guess we say that because we're going to be having we're spoiling things. We're going to be having a podcast about questions later in the week that is specifically just for questions. So questions are going to be held on that podcast day.
Could it have been bunnies that sunk the Titanic?
Possibly. All right, so tomorrow,
Something else.
are we doing our walkthrough?
I guess we'll do our walkthrough tomorrow.
All right, so we did our walkthrough of Demo 2, live streamed it on the YouTubes, and it didn't save. I mean, it was a fun
Wait,
night.
what questions did you ask about the documentary?
There were like 500 people watching us. There were a lot of jokes going around. I had plenty to drink. It was a good night. So,
Again.
what was my question?
No, not you. Someone else. Someone said they asked a question about the documentary. If you did, I didn't see it. If you asked a question about this documentary that we talked about tonight about the fire, ask it again because I didn't see it, and now I can't see it because people said things. Okay, go ahead, Tom.
I make
While
the
you're
water
looking
by
for
turning on the faucet.
Tomorrow we're going to be doing the demo again. We're going to walk through. It's going to be a live stream on YouTube. We're going to post the information on our Facebook. Go RSVP and check it out. It'll be a lot of people. It's going to be pretty cool. I think it's going to be about 5 p.m.
Maybe a little earlier.
Eastern time. Yeah, it's going to be 5 p.m. Eastern time.
Maybe
And then
earlier.
if you miss it, it's going to be on YouTube archived as well. We might also start putting our podcasts on YouTube.
Yeah.
So. Okay. All right.
What about a pad room? If you want to ask about the pad room, come to the podcast. That's about general questions. General questions will be held later in the week.
The question was, do you know anything about the survivor in the documentary?
Which one was that?
There was no survivor in the documentary. I mean, unless they refer to one. Because they didn't interview any.
I don't remember. I watched the.
I still think it could have been bunnies.
Yes.
You can't trust them. They're all cute and fuzzy, but they're bad. They're really evil.
All right. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for listening to our little vent session. And,
We did get a vent a little bit sometimes.
yes, it's good to do that.
I think my heartbeat went up a little bit.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody. I hope you agree with our points. If not, let us know. And talk to you later. All right. Well, join us.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining us, guys.
We'll post the thing about tomorrow's not podcast. It'll be on
Live
the
stream.
YouTube. You'll be on YouTube like the thing before, like our Botanic thing. So yes. And then, like I said, we said general question podcast will be later in the week. We think Thursday. Yes, Thursday.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, good. All right, everybody. What?
Okay.
Nothing.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, guys.